So, to the viewers then, who are not familiar with these three activists on the screen, huge thank you to all three of you for coming on. Should we just go around the screen and you could just each introduce yourself? And I know Gloria has got a more formal introduction to what we're going to be doing this evening. So, Anneke, do you want to start then?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Anneke Lucas. I'm first a survivor of child sex trafficking, which included satanic ritual abuse and mind control. I'm from Belgium. I was trafficked in the Belgian network, and I recently published a book, Quest for Love, Memoir of a Child Sex Slave, and I work with survivors as a counselor. So you can find me just typing in my name. You'll see a lot come up, a lot of interviews, etc. Thank you.
Okay, Maggie next.
Hi, Shaun. Nice to
Hi.
be here. Yeah, I was a police officer working for Greater Manchester Police for 16 years, and I saw repeatedly victims of sexual abuse, particularly the grooming gangs, being failed and the authorities turning away. I spent about 18 months as a serving police officer trying to get the truth out there. Failed, thought I'd go to prison. I ended up resigning and speaking out publicly, and I became the program consultant on the drama Three Girls. Now I wrote my book, Survivors, if anybody wants to read it, and I started the Maggie Oliver Foundation 3 years ago, and we are advocating and fighting for victims who have no voice, and we also support survivors of childhood sexual abuse, adult survivors, as they try to put their life back together. So that's a quick run through.
Fantastic. And some people may have seen the podcast we've done.
Yeah.
Okay, Gloria, do you want to introduce yourself and then give us a bit more background about what the
Yeah.
structure is for the night?
Okay, certainly. Kia ora te whānau from New Zealand. Lovely to meet you, Maggie. Anneke, I've met you before. But hey, for the audience watching, and thank you again, Shaun, for this. I am a survivor of 16 years of child sexual abuse, including trafficking, leased to gangs, torture, and pornographic movies, all child exploitation. Family made a great deal of money out of me. That's my backstory. That's in a memoir I wrote and published last year. This year, I've written and published Flight Path to Healing, a guide for child sexual abuse survivors, from one survivor to another, to help people traverse the really traumatic, difficult terrain that recovering from this brings. It's not a simple path, and the layers go deep, as we all know. The reason for this tonight and this panel discussion is quite simple, really. I was keen to get these fabulous women in the room because we are three women. We are leaders in our space. We are from three different parts of the world, and we need to look at CSA, child sexual abuse, globally. Why? Because it's time. Why? Because there is such a need for this. In New Zealand, police give me one report of up to 1 in 3 adults, and I'm not just talking girls. It's hugely underreported with our males, simply because there is no space for them to do that. And the reason is men are meant to be strong and brave and deal with everything that comes their way, as well as protect us. So therein lies the disparity. So simply 3 women, 3 leaders, 3 different countries. Welcome to all.
Okay, because of what you guys have just said then about being survivors, I'm under a legal restriction from the UK police in this country. So I've got to ask you a question before we can proceed. And that is, Anneke, do you waive your anonymity?
Yes.
Okay, and Gloria, do you waive your anonymity?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, and as you guys know, one of the things we're campaigning for is to end the war on drugs and mass incarceration, take those resources, go after the predators. It just seems that, they're locking young people up for really long terms for drugs and stuff like that. Yet these paedophiles get slaps on the wrist. You know, if they're with the church, they bring in these high-priced lawyers, as we saw in that documentary, Sins of My Father, and they create hundreds and hundreds of victims. And these victims, then they're traumatized. Many of them get into drugs and crime. They fill the prison system, which is a massive burden on society. Why do you guys think then that the justice system on this heinous crime has got it upside down? Let's start with Anneke.
Well, yes, my answer to that is quite simple, because I was trafficked in what I call the seat of power, which involved world leaders at the time. So we're talking when I was 9 years old, and this is 1972. So at that time, there were people involved who were very visible on the world stage of that time, who were obviously pedophiles, and they were satanic. That's to say, they engaged in horrendous rituals that included child sacrifice. So that culture also that I observed within the elite seems to be one of child abuse, that their own children were being abused as well, and these were all, to my understanding, they were all survivors of child abuse, child sexual abuse themselves, who had never had any healing, never had the courage to really look at a little bit more deeply at their own pain, and then use the power system to literally dump on everyone, but especially on directly get a release from their own pain on new victims, and of course protect and use their resources, their extensive resources, and legalized theft of all of us to basically protect these lies, meaning the biggest lie that those people at the very top are either pedophiles or are closing their eyes to pedophiles they know.
So Maggie, working in law enforcement, then, you know, you told us about your own struggles in the first podcast that we did. So
Yeah.
what is your perspective on why the justice system has got this upside down?
I think what I would say, Shaun, Anneke, thank you for sharing that. Anybody who wants to know my backstory can read my book, but I want to focus on what the foundation is doing today, and what you've just said there, Anneke, absolutely rings a bell with me today, because in the foundation we are approached now every day by victims who are being failed today, and I can tell you categorically, truthfully, that we are dealing with a similar case today that you have just spoken about. But what I would say is that at the Maggie Oliver Foundation, we are fighting for those who don't have a voice. And what I am trying to do with my team, who are fantastic, many of us are survivors, is join together the dots and build a voice, build a powerful voice, and share details, not individual details and identities, but share the details of how the authorities are failing victims today by exactly what you say, by covering up, by corruption, by people in high places. You know, I've been involved now in as you know, Shaun, in many, you know, I was part of the National Abuse Inquiry, the ICSA inquiry, which was meant to look at organised networks. It was the terms of reference were too narrow. They didn't pick the right towns and cities. They didn't allow victims to speak. So those in places of power want to dampen down the voices of those who know the truth. And that is where the foundation is unique, because we are, some of my team are ex-police officers. We know how the system works. Some of us, including myself, we have faced the fear of going to prison for speaking the truth. And once you've faced up to that fear and you've accepted the consequences, actually the power has gone from those at the top. And I don't care what people say. For me, it is about sharing the truth, bringing in the changes and exposing the corruption where it exists. And it's by women like us, and I'm Shaun allowing us to speak, that we build an army for change. And, you know, anybody who wants to know what we do, follow Maggie Oliver UK on Twitter, on LinkedIn. You know, all three of us, I think, are doing the same thing in different countries and sharing the truth and reaching the public. And I think that's the only way we are going to bring about changes. I don't know any other way to do it.
So, Gloria, why do you think the system is upside down with this?
Yeah, look, I completely endorse 100% what Maggie just said. In my humble opinion, it's quite simple. It's upside down because it doesn't suit the narrative. There's an investment in this, and it is from the power base. Secondly, we have three core groups. We have gatekeepers, we have enablers, and we have pedophiles. And each of the three work in conjunction with each other. There is no appetite for this to be exposed because among people like ourselves, or good people out across the world, Shaun, they don't like to discuss child sexual abuse. It's not a pleasant topic. All that does, in my humble opinion, is give a free pass to the pedophiles to continue with their trafficking and their pedophile rings. We struggle with discussing it, not as in these people on this panel, but globally across the world. There's no permission or appetite, and in fact, the silence is deafening. So what we need to do is shout it from the rooftops. People say to me, why do you keep talking about this? And my answer is simple. It could be your child or grandchild I save.
Yeah.
Fantastic answers from all three of you. Thank you. So you'd think
Sure,
then,
Shaun, can I just
yes,
say that, you know, we three live and breathe this topic every day, but it's only with people like you and with media partners that we are able to share these truths, because without the media, we are one voice hidden in the background. So, you know, all three of us, I'm sure, but in the foundation, we have trusted media partners. And when the authorities fail to act, we go to those trusted media partners. We share survivor stories because it is like gathering an encyclopedia of evidence, and that builds pressure, I hope.
well, it does build pressure, but there's a backlash, which leads to my next question, because Maggie, you know, the stuff that we did and the coverage we did on Epstein and personal stories of Gloria and Anneke, things of that nature that we were posting on YouTube reached such a point. We had so many people watching this stuff that YouTube terminated my channel twice. Campaigns were launched against me. I was called into the police station and I got a caution over it and restrictions on reporting it, and on and on and on it goes. So my question for you guys is then, when you are talking about this and you're putting yourself out there, are you guys experiencing this backlash as well? Start with Anneke.
Yes, that is the simple answer. Absolutely. In the last years, I have been infiltrated. Weird people have shown up at my door. My life has been threatened several times, as well as my family's. Yes, absolutely. And I think this was particularly related to my wanting or my being approached by a lawyer to potentially file a lawsuit against the estate of one of my perpetrators, which I'd shared on your show. And right afterwards, this started in full force. You know, it was quite something. But as soon as my story went viral in 2016, which was, you know, a little video, black and white video, that went around the world, things started to happen. And then after 2020, since I did not go forward with this lawsuit, not really because I really didn't want to, I just kind of was going along, and we ended up without a lawyer in New York, and that's really the reason. But we did have other people, other survivors who were willing to be part of this lawsuit, and it just wasn't right. But by the time that we would have gone and filed that complaint, and it would have become public, basically, interestingly, the media had picked up on the topic, and now the SRA, there was one count in this complaint that had to do with a sacrifice, and the blood of the victim, of the child, being drunk at this ritual. So the rest was 95 counts of sexual abuse or something like that, but there was that one count of the ritual. So by the time that we would have filed a lawsuit, all of the media, the mainstream media, PBS, which is, you know, national public radio here, had massive campaigns linking SRA, satanic ritual abuse, to QAnon. And it had become a right-wing conspiracy theory. The entire thing was mocked, and there were literally yoga influencers. You know, I come from the yoga background. Yoga influencers telling their followers, please, people, do not be so naive. Do not believe that the elite kill children and drink their blood. That is ridiculous. And I was receiving emails from people who knew my story, to warn me against this horrific, ridiculous conspiracy theory that was my own story. So yes, it seems like I personally have dealt with this a lot, and now that my book is out, things I'm assuming things are starting up, going to be starting up again. And then there's also, you know, what seems like, you know, a very well-timed media campaign in case we would have been revealing the name of that perpetrator in a lawsuit.
Yeah, I was labeled a QAnon conspiracy theorist at the height of the Epstein coverage. So, Maggie, do you think that you are walking through fire on this mission?
Yes, but you know what? They picked on the wrong one, because once you make a decision, you are going to stand up for what is right. You know, ordinary, decent people, there is no turning back. And Anneke, I absolutely take my hat off to you for sharing your story. But I remember when I was going through all this in the police, and I remember what it did to me, and I couldn't really talk about what they did to me. So what I have tried to do is not talk about what they did to me, because that doesn't matter. I'm trying to gather lots of different stories, because I think there's strength in numbers, and you can add detail to your story. But if there's 10 people like you, and 50 and 100 and 1,000, I want everybody to come to the foundation, because we are gathering the evidence of everybody who is being failed in the same way. So throughout the UK now, we say to every survivor or victim of sexual abuse, of childhood sexual abuse, come to us. We just had a review into Oldham. We are trying to build the national picture, and take those cases to the police. Now, if they do nothing, we go to the media. But I want to see senior police officers held to account for failures. And it doesn't really matter which those cases are. It's a pattern of failure for every victim who is like you. But all those individual stories need to be gathered together, because otherwise they will dismiss one victim, horrific as it is, as one victim. But you're not alone, are you? You know, there's thousands like you, and they would have you believe that you are isolated, that you've got nobody else beside you. I do believe there's strength in numbers, and I see the foundation as the magnet for those voices to come in the UK. And there is nowhere else, I don't think, in the UK. I don't know about your countries. Where do you live, Anneke?
I live in the US, and I work with survivors all day long. Yeah.
Yeah. So you know it's probably the same in the US.
Yes, but most of SRA survivors have not gone to the police, for example, you know, so we're dealing with different things a little bit. It's more about spreading awareness, and I'm also supporting survivors in coming out with their stories. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm known for grooming gangs, but really any victim of sexual abuse is equally traumatized, I think.
Thanks, Maggie. Gloria, what's your backlash been like?
Yeah, well, interesting. With people in the survivor community, nothing but love and support, and please never stop. And that's global, and there's lots of interest globally, partly due to the unique nature of my own horror story, but also the fact that I run a YouTube channel where interviewing survivors is shared, as well as tips for supporting survivors. And the reason for that, and then I'll come back, Shaun, to what you asked. The reason for that, team, is because I agree with Maggie. We need to get numbers together. If 2/3 of the population have not experienced child sexual abuse, I want to provide tips for them on how to support us as survivors of child sexual abuse. If we can bring people in and encourage and provide resource and support, I think that's crucial. In terms of the backlash here, it's deafening silence, Shaun. In the UK, in the States, across the world, I'm interviewed constantly. In New Zealand, nada, nil, 0, -1, no interest whatsoever. Why? Because it doesn't fit the narrative. I've been told by 2 key media outlets our viewers would be disturbed by this. So, in other words, let's put it under the rug and never expose it. But that just makes someone like me, and I think, Maggie, you and I have this in common, that just makes someone like me a bit more determined.
Yeah.
And we are warriors. We will never give up advocating and fighting for what is right. So I think in terms of what's needed, we need to take rip the plaster off, rip the Band-Aid off, and get this out there front and centre, because unfortunately the biggest global industry financially is trafficking, specifically child sex trafficking.
You know what, Gloria, I always say to people, as a police officer, Shaun, you've just said about drug crime, you know, about I used to work in major crime. I didn't work in child protection, so I worked on gang-related murders and drugs, and I always used to say, you know, you can sell a bag of heroin once, you've had your profit, you've got to buy more heroin. With a child, you can sell that child repeatedly. It is a really, really lucrative business, and the authorities here are still turning away whenever they can, because it's easier not to pull the plaster off. But we have to make sure that we don't allow that to happen. And I think in the UK, the big game changer in relation to awareness was the drama that I worked on for 4 years, 3 Girls. And that hit a nerve in this country. And now the cat's out of the bag. I think survivors and victims know they are not alone. Some of the shame surrounding this subject in the UK, I think, has gone, particularly with young women. I don't think that's necessarily still the case with young men, but we are going in the right direction. It is just far too slow. But I guess we have to just keep banging that drum.
So a common theme then from all of you is that the people in power, some of them are perpetrators, some of them are complicit. If they hold the reins of the media, of law enforcement, of the justice system, what hope is there? I'll start with Anneke.
Yes, and it looks like my image is frozen. I'm not sure if you can see me, but
Yeah, you're fine. You're fine.
Okay, great. Yeah, I actually am very hopeful, because I come from not being able to speak about anything at all about my own story, including to therapists in the 80s. And it, you know, it took me 10 years really to find a therapist who's open to even hear the kinds of things that I was, that, you know, the flashbacks and the memories that I was getting. So I've steadily been incredibly impressed with how much people are able to hear. And when my story first went viral in 2016, I noticed that there was still a bit of a sensational touch to it. And of course, when you have these extreme abuses, and it is very difficult to hold it, it is very difficult. I understand that it is hard to hear. You know, you don't want to visualize a child being abused, for example. It is emotionally very upsetting. On top of that, with these kinds of stories, it also may have you question the entire power structure. You know, your entire worldview may be endangered when you really accept that these things are true. So I really do understand the reticence of people to really let that in. And I can only say that I'm just super impressed by the increasing ability of people willingness to really hear it and to really get all the aspects of it and to stay away from the sensationalism and really be willing to change their worldview and be willing to even look at themselves, because ultimately this taps into your own trauma as well. You know, if you have issues with authority figures, you know, or if you want to be an authority or whatever, that it's going to affect something, you know, our stories. So yeah, I feel very hopeful, let's put it that way. And of course, what that means in terms of change is questionable, but everything is coming out right now. You know, we do see this this incredible explosion really of truth coming to the surface, and I do feel that this particular element is the key that will turn everything around. That is to say, the pedophilia in the halls of power.
Thank you. So Maggie, so if the people in power are perpetrators or enablers or just, you know, perpetuating this system, what hope do we have?
I think it is quite a bleak picture. I don't think I'm as optimistic as you, Anneke. At the foundation, for instance, we're often approached by current victims who are having the doors slammed in their faces today. We will take that case, and they're all over the country, to the police force involved. But very often that police force will still not investigate, so we'll go higher up the chain. I really feel that I always call it willful blindness, because you know, you don't lift the carpet and you don't see what's underneath because you know what's underneath. I think in the UK anyway, that if we were to see at least one chief constable, senior police officer in a criminal court of law charged with gross misconduct or criminal, you know, malfeasance in a public office, and prosecuted for that failure of his duty, I believe we would see radical changes overnight, because I don't believe that everybody in high places is necessarily involved in the abuse. I think that it's far easier just to turn away from it and not get involved. And the cases that I've, you know, fought and exposed, the Augusta case from 2005, Rochdale from 2010, if we knew today that if a chief constable today knew that if they ignored or turned away from a current case, that in 5 years' time they could be in front of a court, they could lose the pension, they could lose the future, they would think very differently today, and they would make different decisions. So for me, I believe that that would radically change the landscape overnight. And I really do feel until we get to that point, it's going to be a constant daily struggle for every victim to be heard. If a person in power decides that they don't want to hear what they've got to say, that's where we come in, because they are not alone. We know how to get through the system up to a point, and we will not go away. But it's still, every case is still a struggle. But I think accountability, legal accountability, personal responsibility is one of the answers that will go some way to improving the situation anyway.
Thank you, Maggie. What do you think, Gloria, confronted with the system that's presently in place? What hope is there, and what can we do to change it?
Well, it's interesting, and I'm not normally a fence sitter, but I agree with both what Maggie and Anneke said, and I do see some hope, so I'll address that first. 20 years ago, there were no discussions. There were no forums like this. There were not a lot of charities that existed, none that I can think of in New Zealand anyway. To me, people are coming forward more and more. And so I see that as hopeful and positive, and giving permission to survivors. And I'm only talking about child sexual abuse, Maggie, because that's all I know, but child sexual abuse survivors coming forward and feeling safe enough to do so. I think there's a groundswell of support for that, and I'm grateful to see that happen. Does that mean that it's where it should be? Not at all. So I think we have across society very powerful people who either are involved, leading, or part of this, and so therefore that's where it gets stopped and blocked. However, we also have to take into account the Darvo effect, and I've written about this in the guide, the book for survivors, and it's simply this: Darvo is D for deny, A for attack, R for reverse, V for victim, O for offender. And what happens is, as a survivor, you come forward, you are then denied the opportunity to go further with your disclosure. A, you are then attacked, as in your credibility, or, oh, do you think, you've had a hard time recently, do you really think that happened? Or, your mind can play tricks. R for reverse, so they very cleverly, and I'm including police and government in this impact, they very cleverly do the R, which is reverse the order. See how clever it is? Then the victim becomes the offender and the offender becomes the victim. And hey presto, you've managed to shut down a survivor who took, Anneke will agree, years and years to find the courage to even think about sharing their story, let alone speaking it.
Exactly.
So that's what, as survivors, we are up against, and that's what works to this day. And it's clever, it's insidious, and it's successful. So I possibly gave you a bit of a conflicted answer, Shaun, but that's to the best of my ability.
Oh, thank you, Gloria. So, all three of you are spiritual warriors as well as activists, and you can see the strength in all three of you. But psychologically, is this a double-edged sword? Because all of you have said that a lot of your time is spent helping survivors, and you're absorbing their stories and their cases, and that must be going down into your psyche. How do you deal with all this dark energy that you're ingesting from helping the people that have gone through these things? Anneke?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, actually. I have to say, I spent about 2 decades when, if you would have met me, you would have said, that's a very heavy person, and I had a very sort of dark, heavy energy about me, myself, and I would have spoken slowly and everything was just so hard. And I did come out of that. And so when I speak with survivors, it is the most beautiful thing in the world, because I'm actually, I'm the living hope. And I also can see where they're at exactly. And so it's a very specialized, if you will, healing that gives both of it, that goes both ways, gives me great joy. Yes, it is very heavy, obviously, and I feel the heaviness, but it just makes me also happy. So this, I think that's what we can do, though, as those who have gone through it and gotten like, obviously I will continue healing for the rest of my life. I still get memories, I still get flashbacks, and I have to deal with them. But it does work very differently now. It's a lot more fluid, and that healing process is not really different from a spiritual process. I could say that psychologically I'm healed. I have control of my life and myself to a degree that, I can manage my life very well. So, and I can manage very difficult circumstances very well. So I'd say, yay, very well done in terms of psychology. But it is not different from spiritual, because the integration process really is a spiritual process where once, let's say, feelings that had to be suppressed because and separated from their original cause, let's say the psychological cause, which would have been a trauma. Once those feelings are connected to their source and the integration happens, that there is a magic quality to that healing that that has effects that are only spiritual, that you have more empathy for people, that you can become more humble, you have less of a need to prove yourself, you feel more love for other people, and you even, you know, feel more understanding for, in my case, for perpetrators. So the understanding, the psychological understanding and the insights that I've received have always been totally worth everything that I've done for me. So
Yes, all of your accomplishments are inspirational. So, Maggie, do you feel drained sometimes psychologically, just, you know, from pursuing this constantly?
I think, Anneke, you're probably a lot further along the road than I am. I've never been sexually abused, but the damage to me personally was so. I felt that I'd been used. I felt that I'd been abused. As a police officer, I'd put my heart and soul into fighting for victims and believing that what I was doing was right, and the rug was pulled away. So I spent 10 years fighting for the girls who had been failed, that I had given my absolute word of honor to, that if they put their trust in me, that I would hold their hands through that system. And through no fault of my own, the decision was made from on high that that wouldn't happen. And yet they were the people who had asked me to do that. So I've kind of put my feelings in a box and come out fighting in a way. Now, this year has been a really big deal, not only for those victims, but for me as well, because in April, against all the odds, the new chief constable actually apologized to those victims. And one of whom, who had been put on the indictment as one of the band of paedophiles without her knowledge, without her ever being arrested or cautioned, and she'd spent 8 months as a victim telling us what had happened. They dropped her. That's why I left the police. But then subsequently, as a tactical option to get her evidence into the trial, they secretly put her on the indictment and tried to take her children away from her. They tagged her baby when he was in hospital. It was brutal. So to get that apology to that girl from the chief constable, saying that that job, which was portrayed in the UK as a fantastic success, he said that the way they dealt with it was incompetent. So for me, that has been some closure in a way. But building the foundation, because I was going under with the pressure of helping so many victims. Now I've got a fantastic team. 65% of our team are survivors. So if you're looking for a volunteer role, Anneke, or another one. But you know, I think because we've got a team now, I don't get drawn into the emotional toll of hearing every survivor's story. So I'm kind of trying to share all those voices without the emotional connection. But I've still got a lot of damage there to myself, which hopefully one day, I don't forgive them. I do not. I blame them. And I think that they are wicked, and it's unforgivable what they have done to generations of children in this country, knowingly, deliberately, and pretended that they didn't. So I don't forgive them, and I don't know any other way to kind of, in a way, I guess in a way I'm trying to prove a point that what they did was so wrong that I've more or less dedicated the last 12 years of my life to this subject, and I haven't been through what you two girls have been through. So how on earth you can move forward and have that spiritual forgiveness? I don't forgive them. I want to see them apologize. I want to see remorse. I want to see them change what they're doing. And if they do that, that's the first step. But when they justify and pretend it's not happening anymore, and I know it is, they don't deserve my forgiveness, and they don't deserve the forgiveness of the victims, because they are still letting down victims today. And they could save all those new children from going through what, you know, previous generations have gone through. So that might sound a bit harsh, but that is how I feel. You know, I do still feel that, but that drives me on, really, Shaun. It drives me.
It's your mission, and you're full of passion for it, and we applaud you and salute you. And Gloria, so effectively, you are helping people overcome their demons with the work you do with the survivors, and battling demons must get tiresome.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one, and I just want to touch on forgiveness. To me, bless Maggie, you know, bigger a person or lesser a person if you do forgive or if you can't. It is what it is. It's deeply personal, and what I found was I needed to forgive because it was impacting me and not anyone that had abused or hurt me or made money out of me. So the weight of it lifted when I chose to do that. That doesn't make me right or wrong. It just felt more peaceful and sat with me more deeply. I've been able to move on, and I feel a little bit like, I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Schindler's List, but in there's a line at the end where Liam Neeson, who we all love, says, I could have done more, I could have saved more. Why couldn't I have saved more? And I guess that's my purpose in life. I'm trying to grow the channel and grow the charity to get more survivors feeling that they're heard and supported. That doesn't mean they have to speak out. It could be a myriad of ways they deal with their trauma. But I guess I just want to pick up all the survivors on the way and leave no one behind. So my purpose in life is to do that. I'm now able to do it, and it drives me, and I feel very purposeful, Shaun, and I feel like that because I've found my purpose in life, which is to help others through shining light on this. And so it doesn't tend to bring me down so much anymore. Sometimes I'll get triggered, but I've learned enough, I think, now and done so much healing over decades that I feel safe, and I feel very honoured actually to be able to do this work. I feel very humbled and moved by the survivors. So I guess that's me.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We're down to the last 15 minutes. I'm just going to tell the viewers, if they've got any questions, please put them in the question box or in the chat. And we'll start out with a question from
Shaun, can I
Ziva.
just say one thing before
Yeah.
you take a question? Just that the motto for the foundation is transforming pain into power, and I kind of think that's what we're all doing in a way. And I always say pain doesn't just come from abuse, but what you do with that pain, it helps you recovery, I think. But it can be a long journey. Sorry.
Definitely a long journey, and so many people are not equipped, don't have the psychological tools to deal with it. So what I've seen over and over again is just that they fall back on drugs, which leads to criminality and sadly suicide, death, mental illness, and all the other things, because no one in society helps them. The problems are just compounded when they put in prison and re-traumatized all the more. And the drug they go for is heroin, because that takes them the most out of it, and that often ends, their lives prematurely. So, okay, so the first question from a viewer is Ziva. Thank you, Ziva. 20 to 30 years ago, victims were being labeled with false memory syndrome. In your experiences, is this still happening in the therapeutic world? So I'll start with Anneke.
Yes, the false memory syndrome. When Gloria mentioned Darvo earlier, that was Dr. Jennifer Freed came up with that term. Her parents, she as an adult, accused her father of sexually abusing her as a child, and that those parents created the false memory movement, the Freeds, and the false memory syndrome was basically a doctor, a clinical. She was not a clinical psychologist, Elizabeth Loftus, and that is now being taken apart. If you you'll find articles now about the false memory syndrome and the false memory movement, that you can actually see that this was based on a very flimsy to no science at all, no experiences, no experiential tests were done with survivors at all. And a group of 25 were whispered false memories into their ears by their older siblings of being lost in the mall. It's called the Lost in the Mall study. But nevertheless, that book became a bestseller, and that syndrome has become, that doctor has made huge a huge career defending the likes of Harvey Weinstein, even Ted Bundy, believe it or not, to basically discredit survivors. That has been a really good move on the part of those who want to rule and have the resources and spend them in order to attack the survivors. I have had psychologists who were clearly influenced by this, because the psychology itself as a field is infiltrated, and there's even, if you go on a satanic website, you can find a false memory syndrome part where they actually have a fund to help parents that are being accused of sexually abusing and satanically abusing their children. So you see, it's an organized group, and a lot of money behind it, a lot of power behind it. But that movement it's, you know, the motive of it is very clear. You know, when you think of motive, when survivors come out, what is their motive? You know, what do we get mocked for? That I want attention. Oh, well, yeah. If I wanted attention, I could have just taken my clothes off when I was 20. You know, I'm 60 years old. I'm talking about this. I'm getting attacked a lot. I'm putting my life at risk. So there's nothing to be gained here for me other than just my commitment for truth. So when people attack survivors, obviously their motive could be it's pretty easy to see. You just have to like be willing to look at it.
Thank you. Maggie, what do you think about tactics to dismiss survivors?
I mean, that really is what the thread that went through the Rochdale case. You know, the girl Amber, who was Amber in the drama, that was her name. You know, she was a key witness. She wrote all the names, all the numbers, all the car registration. She took me to all the addresses where this happened. But then the authorities decided, for whatever reason, I never agreed with it, that her account conflicted in minor details with another victim's account. So they couldn't take both stories forward. So they dropped one girl and built a case around the other. But in order to get her evidence into court, they had to completely demonize that victim and destroy her. So it might not be false memory syndrome, but subsequently they said in order to get that evidence into court as a tactical option, they would completely destroy that girl. So I think whether it's accusing somebody, a victim, of having a false memory, whether it's judging a victim for making a lifestyle choice, or whether it's demonizing them to fit a jigsaw puzzle which is being created, I think it's equally horrific and life destroying for that victim, because being believed is critical. Being supported is critical. Whether or not that leads to a prosecution is a different matter. But I think if a victim is judged, is dismissed, is blamed, the damage that does, often I say, is as bad as the abuse itself, because the people who should be supporting you as a victim have left you in a place where you've got nowhere else to turn for the rest of your life, really. And then you are even more vulnerable to the abusers who know you are alone. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it certainly did from your own real world experience. Thank you. And Gloria, have they used these tactics on you? And what do you think of them?
Oh, look, they're very successful, which is what we talked about earlier. Darbo technique and false memory syndrome, I believe, now has been taken down as a society. It's no longer relevant, and I think that happened back in the 90s. But the impact it has is to re-trigger, as both Anneke and Maggie have alluded to, re-trigger the survivor so that you start to second guess, you start to doubt your own sanity, you start to feel completely re-traumatized again. And so what then happens is you're then less likely or less confident to take your story further or forward. So yeah, it's powerful. And I think Maggie, or Anneke, what you talked about regarding the motive, yeah, it's really clear. What's my agenda? Shut that down. Shut that down once and for all. So this is why people like us are doing what we're doing, and all survivors, fabulous survivors out there watching, you know, you're believed. We see you, we hear you, we believe you.
Thank you, Gloria. All right,
Yeah.
next question is from Jake Forder. Do these paedophiles target a particular demographic, Anneke?
Well, if you're talking about the pedophiles in the power system, then, and you have basically what is an exclusive club. Somebody mentioned the Masons, so there are secret clubs involved in those, you know, selections, let's say, and pedophilia is a system of blackmail, really, in that club, so that no one who gets to the top is really untainted either by pedophilia or by knowing about it. And creating materials on these people, which I was used for as a young child, basically having to make the men feel comfortable about their first time with a young child, while these men were being filmed, while we were being filmed and photographed. That was to be used against them, to basically keep them in the system, keep them in that exclusive club. And of course, it's not just anyone that will go ahead and do that. It's someone who's already given up their integrity many times over by the time they are face to face with a young child. So children that are targeted are often, in my case, they came often from poor families, from incestuous families, and pimps for the network would infiltrate those families. The Dutroux case was later on, where one of the pimps started kidnapping children. That became a very big case in Europe, if you'd like to look that up, Dutroux. And generally a lot of the children in this network, in this global network, are born into a satanic family. And working with so many survivors, most survivors come from families that are in, like, say, a small branch of the satanic network in a small town, and then use their children to trade up, and basically the children are then given to people of power, and that's how the families get whatever it is that they benefit, however they benefit, whether it's protection from their pedophilia or whether it is they get power.
Wow.
I hope that answers your question.
It certainly did. Maggie, the demographic that is targeted?
I think what I've seen in my experience is a paedophile spots vulnerability. So in the grooming gangs, there were predominantly children from very difficult backgrounds, not necessarily in care, but where the family had, maybe it was a one-parent family, maybe mum had a nervous breakdown, maybe was an addict, and the children in many ways were fending for themselves. So the child is vulnerable to start with. So for me, that was what made it even worse when the police and the authorities, including social services, stepped back and judged the child, because that child had nobody fighting their corner. And I remember the chief constable kind of dismissing me as this woman who became too emotionally involved. I'd been bereaved. I, took my eye off the ball, shoot the messenger kind of thing. But the children have nobody to fight for them. So I think, vulnerability is what I have seen. And Anneke, I'd be really interested to speak to you later, because I'm listening to you talking, and in my head, I'm thinking of a case that we're dealing with, and I'm learning so much. But you're going back many years. What you're talking about is what we're seeing at this moment in time, and it's frightening. It really is frightening that nothing seems to really have changed. It's scary.
Oh, the only problem is I work with younger survivors, and I could say that the only difference seems to be the technology, really, how cell phones are used to access the victims also. So
Yeah.
Gloria, what are your thoughts on the demographic?
Yeah, so what I see is all levels of society, all cultures, and it doesn't seem to be specifically targeted. I'm talking generic child sexual abuse. I'm not talking SRA. I'm not talking pedophile gangs or trafficking. I'm talking generic child sexual abuse across all levels and within all societies and cultures and genders. And we're actually seeing an upsurge in terms of female sexual abusers as well. There hasn't particularly been permission or acceptance that women do abuse, and I'm here to say they do. And it is quite a well-kept secret, but it is being exposed more and more. So I expect to see a lot more of that come through as well.
Thank you. All right, can all of you then just tell the viewers where they can find you and support you on the social, starting with Anneke?
yes, sure. Basically, my website is AnnekeLucas.com. It's ANNEKELUCAS.com. And there you'll find everything, the links to my recent interviews, of course, the links, all the different links to my book, which is also out on Kindle.
Okay, Maggie.
Yeah, I think the easiest way is the foundation website. So that's www.themaggieoliverfoundation.com, with interviews and links to the book. Or Maggie Oliver UK is all my socials, Twitter or LinkedIn, Facebook page. It's easy to find.
Okay, Gloria.
So look, I've just set up a charity, handingtheshame.back.org. Don't you love it, guys? Handing the shame back every time we speak, every time the survivor speaks. And for the book, gloriamasters.com.
All right, I just want to thank all of you. This has been such a powerful collaboration, and I'm sure everybody who's watching this has been impacted just by your passion, the strength of the testimonies. So wherever you are in the world watching this, please support our guests and check out their links and follow them and help them to your fullest extent. Huge thank you to all the viewers. And yep, cheers, guys. Wherever you are in the world, thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next week. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.